to turn it off at the end. Well, I really been debating about how to do some of this. I didn't really feel like I made the progress and I wanted to last week for certain things. And that has to do with some things going on in reference to, I mean, I'm not going to go into any details, but I've had some surgery I had to go through at the hospital and different things that sort of slowed me down a little bit. And so I'm recuperating, but need to want to be sure that I can cover all this as I need to. Now, if you have any questions, I want you to feel free to ask them. And also, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
I just realized that I pushed the button that makes me be heard. I don't know if let's see, where does this say? Pin from behind me, remove it from me. Okay, I guess I'm good. Okay, as long as you can hear me, I guess the recording hears me. And you don't show any kind of cross out for me talking, right?
No, we can hear you fine.
Okay, I just want to be sure to get that done. I'd hate to spend 3 hours here and all of a sudden find out that you had to do pantomiming.
And we all just sat here and watched your mouth move. Yeah.
That did happen for about 20 minutes in a counseling class. I think Charlie was there for that.
Oh no.
So anyway, trying to get things adjusted. I'm still recuperating from some things, and I've been taking it very, very easy. And it just comes with age. It comes with issues, and so I'm doing okay. Just have to sort of watch myself a little bit.
Yeah, good.
Okay, now what we're going to do, I'm going to go to this. I'm going to skip. Largely, I'll be going between the study Bible where we can read some things and look at some photos and look at some stuff like that, and then also with the PowerPoint, I'm going to go back and just reorient ourselves to a little bit and touch on anything I need to say there, and we're going to keep moving through. I'm going to get you through the beginning of the tribulation period, probably through the first half tonight. Next week, we're going to talk about the continuation and the tribulation, the second coming of Christ, the millennium. Okay. And so we'll end up getting there in our studies. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Now, everyone, you said you can see this. I'm going to put it over. So we're going to go back here a little bit just to get our orientation, and then we'll move on. So some of these things here you've already seen. I'm not worried about that. Just pay attention to them. There's church history and last things. I am not going to teach a class in church history on eschatology, which is not to say I don't know anything about what was held by, over through the medieval period and into the Reformation. There's been a lot of variations of things that occur, but that's not my primary interest. This is more a biblical theological kind of course. So we're not going to discuss Erasmus and Augustine and all these guys very much. Now, here's a history of the church. Like I say, the early church, well, obviously was in what century? These are hard questions. The first century. And then you have the patristic period that begins in the second century, which I have actually a degree in. You'll see my stuff in a moment. I don't mean to brag on it, but I have gone through a lot of training in all sorts of subject areas. I have books in world religions, books in theology, books in apologetics, so I have interest in a lot of things, and hopefully some of that comes through in some of my teaching. But what you'll see here is the medieval church. This is after the 600s. That's after the time basically of Augustine, which is we call the patristic period. And there's an issue of theological definition. What do you think that means? In the first 600 years, theological definition. Well, this is where they begin to find themselves. This is where you have the creeds being made, the church councils going on. Christianity has been under the onslaught of Rome for some time, you know, at the 2nd century and 3rd century, till finally Rome fell. And a lot of other things took place, but the big deal is in the 4th century. Something really big happened in the early 4th century of the Christian era. Any idea what that is?
Council of Nicaea.
Council of Nicaea, but that would not have occurred had something else not occurred.
Is it the
Something,
legalization?
yeah, and now
With
that
the
would
Edict
not
of
have
Milan.
occurred unless something else occurred. I'm moving you back. You said both your things you said are correct.
That when they were questioning the humanity of Christ.
Yeah, they were discussing humanity, divinity, a lot of things were going on, but that's after something big happened, and that was there were 3 people vying for emperorship.
Hmm.
And the one who won was a man by the name of Constantine, called Constantine the Great. And then you have people from him through the end of the 4th century who took positions of being emperor that related to him. One even who tried to go back and restart by building the temple, and he was not very Christian, so he thought this would be an irritation. But yes, you do have the councils at this point. Lots of things are going on. So that's what happened through that period, but that keeps moving on till a time when you have Islam beginning to move into Asia Minor and taking over a lot of things, sort of like they're trying to do today. They've used the same viewpoint on how to conquer since the 7th century AD. That's when they begin to move. You had Muhammad and all these things going on. They actually slowly move. They proliferate because they have several wives and have lots of children, and they are also very rough on people who don't agree with them or whoever forsake them. They are very it's a tyranny. So I've even thought about writing a book called The Myth of Palestine, which is really true, but I'll not get into that. Palestine, except for this, Palestine was actually Greek, not Arab. It was called Philistia and Philistines. They were Greeks from Crete. And then only several centuries later did it become Islamic. And they really haven't been there that long at that period. Anyway, to move away from that. So then you move up to the Reformation period, and several things are going on. By the way, where it says 1500, as you go up that little ladder, the fact is, lots of things were going on in the Christian world that were moving the church back to a Reformation before it actually occurred. I've written a chapter in a book on that for a guy, and you find a lot of examples of people interested in their scripture, the Hebrew, the original languages, a lot of these kinds of things they were interested in before the time of the Reformation, which gave rise to the Reformation. You had little smaller Reformation groups for several hundred years. So you get to the Reformation, you move on down, theological restoration. This is going to be sad to talk about because you move from theological darkness to theological restoration, and then we start moving to theological decline again. And we're encountering that today. I don't know if you know it. There are people who are evangelicals, so-called. I have to say it that way because they have begun to embrace some of the ideas of the Enlightenment because they've committed themselves to evolution and theistic evolution, and they have really departed from the historic Christian faith again. They don't even know what they're doing, I don't think, but they're beginning to be more and more like Rudolf Bultmann. Bultmann didn't start out the way he did, but by the time it was the end of his life, he basically said science is truth, everything in Scripture is mythical. You know, it's basically they say when he talked about the resurrection, he said Jesus is risen. He's risen in our hearts. But he denied that he rose from the dead physically. I want to assure you, if he didn't rise physically, he doesn't rise in your heart either. So that's where things are going in some of our culture right now, which is unfortunate. And I'm actually putting together a number of scholars. We're probably going to write a book dealing with that question. But anyway, I don't want to go into too much of those things. The modern church has gone, we're now in sort of a postmodern church. Oh, for a revival like we had in the 60s and 70s, which began to bring a lot of young people to Christ. Remember? Maybe you've heard of that. Most of you too young didn't know much about it, but Chuck Smith, and and started the Calvary Chapel movement. But that on the coast of California, lots of young people were coming to Christ. Some of that was happening with Charlie Kirk too. But Satan has his way sometimes if we're not careful, and things that look good to begin with begin to go down again. But you can see in these up and downs I'm showing you here on the history, this has happened. It's not, there's never been a level flowing, where everything seems to be working right. It's either getting better or getting worse. It's hard to keep it steady. Any questions on that as I'm going through? You're welcome to ask them. Here I give you a little bit more detail. I'm again not going to go into I'm going to give you more detail, but not going into detail. In the fact that you have the age of the apostles and fathers and apologists and all these groups, and the period of decline. We're seeing that was called the Great Enlightenment. It really wasn't enlightenment, but it's called that period of decline. Okay, now we have a summary of the eschatology of the fathers. This is how they viewed the reality. Now, if you were to read my little article I had on the question of the Olivet Discourse and the fall of Jerusalem, that is one view of theology, but that's not the same question as the matter of people who really have rejected some of the ideas that were found in the early church. And I'm not saying these people are heretics, but I would hold to a premillennial view of the come of Christ. You're familiar with that idea? He comes before the millennium. But what happens before the millennium, after Christ comes, is the tribulation period, which is preceded by the rapture, premillennial view, and then what occurs before then. So there are people who hold that the coming of Christ for the church is in the middle of the tribulation period, toward the end of the tribulation period, and even they say he comes after the tribulation period is complete. That is when Christ comes. I would say Christ comes for the church before the beginning of the tribulation, and he comes back with the church at the end of the tribulation. And then you have what is called a millennial view. And you're probably familiar with these reading your books, right? You've heard of millennialism that says essentially that the kingdom that has been talked about since the time of Jesus will ultimately be fulfilled in the millennium when he actually comes back and reigns as David's son from Jerusalem. And that's what that's about. So we'll say some things about those matters. But here we have Israel. Obviously, there would be no church apart from Israel because Israel is the one who receives the blessing, right? The blessing, dealt with this last time. What did I say about the blessing of Abraham and the covenant with Abraham? How does that relate to eschatology?
Well, if you hold to a dispensationalist view rather than a covenantal one, a covenantal theologian would say it was, or usually at least would say it was fulfilled spiritually through the church. If you take a dispensational position that says it has to be fulfilled literally, then the portions regarding the land or the Palestinian government, those still need to be fulfilled. So then that raises the question: when are they going to get fulfilled? And if I understand your position correctly, it would be during the millennial reign.
But even covenantalists believe that there is a covenant with Abraham, and which is fulfilled in Jeremiah and his talking about the church. They believe the church actually receives the entirety of a covenant, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whereas I would argue that Israel receives 2/3 of that for sure, and then serves in the third portion of the covenant to help bring blessing to Gentiles. And that comes through Galatians 3, where Christ is the seed of Abraham and obviously the seed of David. And so the church participates through Christ, who is the one who brings the blessing that's found in Jeremiah. So that's how I would construct that. I don't know if you've heard that before, but that's at least the way I would look at it. So you have Israel, then you have a first advent. That's when Jesus comes back and becomes a human being and Messiah, but he's not recognized as Messiah, which means he leaves and he will come back at the end of the tribulation period to finally set up his throne as David's son from Jerusalem. Which means that not only does the Gentiles and Jews participate in the death and resurrection of Jesus, but also when he comes back, he will come back as the fulfilling the statements we see in Scripture about him being David's son reigning from Jerusalem, Messiah in his fullness. So that's what happens during the millennial period for 1,000 years. The kingdom of Messiah is happening. But after that happens, at the very end of the millennial period, we have judgments that take place, decisions that are made, and we won't go into those right now, at the end of the tribulation, where the judgment occurs, giving of recognition of being in the book of life and not being in the book of life. And then you have the eternal state of the new heavens and earth. I really don't know a lot about the new heavens and new earth, and neither of you will you probably, because those things are not really laid out very far. They're about the kind of detail you find in Genesis 1 on the beginning of the heavens and earth. And the end of Revelation, you find about the same amount of detail for a chapter or so. It basically says the ending. So these are the events that occur over time. And so we'll just keep moving then. Now, I'm going to say some things today, a little bit more about the Olivet Discourse, because I think that is misunderstood. There are Christians, and by the way, even myself, wondering at one time which portions of Matthew 24, Mark 13, and so forth, which portions of those refer to the tribulation period, which portions of those refer to the rapture. Okay? The time of the judgment during the tribulation, and the time of the church being taken away. It's really more and more study on that has caused me to think that essentially Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse refers to three different areas we're going to look at. And the most important aspect of it deals with the tribulation. But you have an initial period and a subsequent period that occurs on either side of it that we'll look at. So I hope you have your Bible up, and if you don't, we'll be also looking at a study Bible on it. So what about the Olivet Discourse and the second coming? Isn't this referring to the rapture? Many people believe that when they read Matthew 24, is talking about the rapture of Christ for Christians. But when you start reading it more carefully, I don't think that's actually where it goes. I think there's an aspect of that, but majority of it relates to, in fact, what we think of as the time that of moving into God's judgment and tribulation period, largely. Rise of the man of sin and so forth. So there's a confusion of two events between the mid-trib and pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib perspectives due to texts like Matthew 24. Some believe that Christ is going to wait and rapture you sometime in the tribulation period if you've been a good boy and good girl. I'm being facetious, But it's this concept that says, well, some people, they just didn't have their lives straightened up enough, so they have to go through some of the tribulation period before they can be taken to heaven with Christ. That's one view. Some people just simply believe that halfway through tribulation, people are raptured, some at the beginning. So we'll look at that a little bit. The Olivet Discourse is found in Matthew 24 and 25, Mark 13, and these verses in Luke. It's a little confusion because when you look at Luke, it really seems to indicate the Roman army coming and surrounding Jerusalem. It sounds very much that way. And it may be that's the case because the fact is the Olivet Discourse doesn't talk necessarily all about something, even to our day, because it didn't happen then. But it's something that is initiated and eventually is fulfilled, is what it is. It starts out, sort of flutters a little bit, has a little bit, and messiahs throughout history. That seems to be what Jesus said, and we're going to look at that in a moment. Mark 13 of that. It deals with events of the tribulation. It deals with the second coming. It deals with the sheep and goat judgment, and it also admonishes believers. 4 areas are talked about in the Olivet Discourse. Now, I know that you've read 2 or 3 books, right? Or you're reading them. And there may be difference of opinion sometimes among people. I don't know exactly which ones you guys are reading, but there are good people that differ on these questions. It's okay to be wrong sometimes, and but I think that much of the thinking that came out of many books that get this Olivet Discourse confused doesn't help. Now, you have a setting for it. There's prophetic judgment, condition for the second coming, and a comment on the temple in the chapters of Matthew 21 through 24. The temple is important in biblical prophecy. By the way, a friend of mine, Randall Price, wrote an entire big, thick book on the temple and prophecy. So if you ever want to read a lot on this, Randall Price has a book on that. But there's different ways to see what's going on. We'll be looking at some of those in just a moment. Disciples ask some questions, and we're going to examine what their questions are here. All I have to do is be able to find where it is here. Okay, here we go. Can you read that okay? This is my visual study Bible. This is something that has never been done before. I had a person who is an expert in the area of Bible study tools on the internet. He's done it for decades. And he sent me an unsolicited, what would you call, evaluation and something I could use. And I haven't brought it to show you that. It's about a page and a half. But something like this has not really been done before. This is available if you ever want it. But here's Matthew 24. And so what I want to do is we're going to go through this, and I'm going to show you some pictures along the way I thought might be interesting to you since we're going to be talking about that. So let's start in Matthew 24, verse 1. Jesus went out from the temple and was going on his way. Now, let's stop there. How many people went inside the temple of the ancient days? Anybody much know? The temple. Generally speaking, you had priests that operated on the outside where the sacrifices were done, but you had only one person that went into what we call the Holy of Holies. And where that exists, I think I can show you maybe. I don't know if I have an example here. If not, I do have one. When I went inside the Dome of the Rock, which I often call the Rock of the Dome, because it's the rock that's significant, not the dome that's built around it. The mosque that was built by the Muslims is not particularly significant. but there's a rock there upon which the Holy of Holies was set. And a man by the name of Rittmeyer, he's a expert in architectural kinds of things and drawing and also study of the temple and some of these things. He did his doctorate at Hebrew University. He has an example where he actually did measurements. There's a place, an incision on top of the rock that you can see a ark would fit, and his computation says its exact size. So we probably know where the in the holiest of holy places, when the priest went in one time a year, the very place the ark set. We don't know where the ark is today. I don't know if it was destroyed or what, but nonetheless, I have pictures of it from the top. I hope I have one here I can show you. If not, I'll show you another time. But I've got pictures looking down on it and also around and so forth. So Jesus went out from the temple, but temple doesn't necessarily mean the temple structure itself, but the temple area. You understand what I'm saying? A person's saying in reference to like the temple places, the temple buildings, being in the temple, so that the term temple sort of covered not only the physical structure of the temple, but the temple area. And the reasons for that is because of what's going to be said. Jesus went out from the temple and was going on his way. His disciples came to show him the buildings of the temple. There were several buildings on top of the temple. And I'm going to show you a picture written. It's not mine. It's one Randall Price had. Someone actually did this for him. But I'm going to show you some various pictures here just real quickly. How many have been to Israel? Oh, I got a group already ready to go. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many are? I've got 10 students. I've been there 45 times. I've lived there. I sort of know something about the area. I've spent some time working on stuff there, even archaeology stuff. So it's a fascinating place to go. I know we're setting up another tour for next year. I deliberately have not gone during the thing we had that Fauci said was just a little problem, you know. The whole idea of the infection that people were getting. I'm trying to think of the name of it. You'll forgive me. Part of my problems right now is my brain. It has lapses in finding words sometimes. And now I have a monster trying to kill me in here. Let that thing go. Anyway, you don't have to be here to appreciate this. This stupid gnat or something floating around in front of me. But anyway, I had a 5-hour surgery about a year or so ago, and during that time they told me that with the anesthesia actually would go and your brain begins to close up the channels, and you actually have to go, and it takes a year or two sometimes for it to come back up with the same concepts again. You have to restructure. It's a crazy situation. So generally I can talk, and then I come across something I'm thinking, I can't think of the word. What is a stupid word? I know it. I even have friends. I know their name. I've known them 30 years. I don't know what their name is. It's a crazy experience. So just to bear with me, I'm sorry for it. But the point of it is the buildings of the temple included several things. One was Solomon's portico. Have you ever been to Greece? Anybody been to Greece? If you go to Greece, if you go to the place of the Stoics, called the Stoa, and it's down in the under area under the Areopagus in the Parthenon and so forth in Greece. You have this beautiful building, and it looks very much like what I'm going to show you. So let me show you a few things here. Can you see that? Okay. Yep. This is not there. I had a Muslim in Egypt one time at a hotel I was staying at. He looked at this and he said, "Where's that?" So it's just a picture, because I didn't want to tell him the fact that I had actually taken out the Dome of the Rock and put in a copy of the temple, as has been envisioned to be. So what you see here, you can actually see a large section of the temple. This would be This is in fact where they had the offerings of the bulls and so forth. This is also an area where you would enter into offer your offering and go in here. This is a place of the women, and it's not a very, but women could come in this area. They could not come in this area, and you were very limited in coming in this area because your priests were basically here, and then they go into the Holy of Holies. So this is what is called the Kidron Valley right here, where my little arrow's going, and this is an entrance. They used to have actually an entire bridge across here years and years ago, and that's it. I'm not going to go into too much more, but this is the Mount of Olives, and these are graves here. They have thousands of graves on top of the Mount of Olives, and so over here are some other things. So I'm going to close this on my study Bible temporarily, and then what happened? I guess I got rid of it. Back up. Great to make a mistake. There we are. I guess I can't do it that way next time. All right. So let me get here. And you can see a view of the temple from the Mount of Olives, a little different view. See that? So this right here gives you some perspective. The Mount of Olives is very large. It goes all the way from one side, almost of Old Jerusalem, all the way to the other side. And just on the other side of the Mount of Olives is the city of Bethany, where Lazarus was. So there was a bridge across here. And this now is what you obviously see, the Dome of the Rock. All right. Now let's just give you some perspective. And Matthew 24 again, I think I'll do that. There we are. Now you can see that. Now, this is something done for Randy. It's Christine Kidd. That's the person who did this. Gives you perspective. Now, let me tell you some things about it. Here's the temple. This is an area open for Gentiles. This was open for Gentiles. This is the Stoa kind of building. It looks sort of like the Stoa in Greece and Athens. And this is where the priests would get down, and they'd come through here. This is the western wall that people talk about today. Notice, though, it had an entrance in these days. Okay? And this goes all the way this way. This is the north, south, west, and east of the city. That's the orientation. Okay? Down here is a place people would go into the temple. This is closed up now because of Islam. But this is also closed up because of Islam, because this is where this is no longer here because the Al-Aqsa Mosque was put into here. And they've also built another mosque in the bottom of this, which I have pictures of because a Muslim friend of mine went and took them since I couldn't get in there. And so that sort of gives you perspective. This is where the day of Pentecost probably occurred, right here. This has a place in this building. It would have been for rooms, big rooms, people would get together for prayer and other kinds of things. That's what Peter and the disciples were doing. And you would have imagined how many thousands of people would be out here on the day of Pentecost. And then they found 31 baptismal pools called mikvah, in which they would have been able to baptize 3,000 people in a day, the way it's done in those days, with 12 disciples. I'm sure that would be possible. Okay, anything on that? I sort of wanted to show it to you.
So do you think that south side of the court of Gentiles is probably the courtyard that Jesus overturned the tables in?
He could have, since you can still see this. This is for sure probably where the Gentiles were, any that were there, in reference to the day of Pentecost. For example, what they call a proselyte of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the Ethiopian eunuch was a proselyte of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
That is, he wasn't a Jew, but he embraced Judaism.
Yeah, a God-fearer.
Huh?
A God-fearer?
Yeah, a God-fearer. That's a term like in First Corinthians, book of Acts, chapter 10. And so you have that kind of scenario there. He was a proselyte of the gate. This guy was a Roman. He was Italian, Cornelius.
Yeah.
And he and his family, they followed the way of Judaism because he was very much taken with it. This was not uncommon in those days, by the way, for this to happen. And then the Ethiopian eunuch going back to Ethiopia with Philip, the evangelist, same kind of thing. So they had thousands who were Jews and many thousands probably, who knows, who were proselytes. The problem they did not like is this, if you'll look here. This right here.
Yeah.
These are openings. And they had signs, and they used to have those visible at places. I won't go into that study right now. There's an issue on that. But they have found at least I've seen two, maybe three, of the plaques that sit outside these entrances here, this wall in front of you that has various entrances. That's where you could get in. But remember, Paul was charged with bringing a Gentile into the temple. See, they used a phony charge on him, saying he'd gone through there and been in there as a Gentile.
Yeah.
You can't do that. So, anyway, let me go back to this. So we're moving through the Matthew passage. Let's go back here. I want to give you, I found this one. I thought this was an interesting painting of where it would have been with Jesus and his disciples. They didn't have a classroom to, do anything in. They're up there probably sitting around here, and they are talking about the buildings of the temple that we're seeing. That's the key I want to bring to you. The fact is that it really doesn't indicate that all they were talking about is somehow a future event. They said, what's going to happen in regards to these buildings? See, they think these are wonderful buildings. Jesus says, you see all these? Most surely I tell you, there'll be not one left here, one stone on another that will not be thrown down. What's interesting is that when Vespasian came into Jerusalem in AD 70, and he had his son Titus with him, there was actually an intent on the part of them to save the temple. Such a great building, and of course they'd have probably made a pagan temple of it, like it did happen later in the time of Hadrian. That occurred 50 years later. But instead, though, it was destroyed with all the passion that was going on. And also other buildings on top of the Temple Mount were destroyed. So all those fit Jesus' statement. But what people don't realize, when it talks about these buildings will not be one stone upon another, it doesn't say a thing about the temple walls, the Temple Mount walls, because if you go there to the western walls, I spent the day with Ronnie Rice, who was actually the guy who excavated that. He showed all the stuff to me. And it was interesting because we're talking about massive weight and walls coming down and filling up an entire area. So those stones did fall, but they were not the buildings of the temple. That's the point I'm making. Everybody with me? Okay, now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him. Tell us then, when will these things be? What is a sign of your coming and the end of the age? So his coming is not identical to the end of the age. There's things that have to take place. Jesus answered, be careful that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name. Notice, not one, but many. I think I told you a friend of mine, what was his name? Can't think of it now. But anyway, a great guy. He wrote a book, big, thick book on messiahs in history. There have been messiahs after messiahs after messiahs who declared themselves to be the coming Messiah. So Jesus said, many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and will lead many astray. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you aren't in trouble. The end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, plagues. Jesus seems to be saying, my coming is going to be a while off. You understand that? It's not going up and coming down. I mean, when he went up into the sky, the angels talked to the disciples after that. When he proceeded up into the sky, he said he will come in like way in which he left. Okay? That's in Acts chapter 1. So what you have is a recognition that Jesus is leaving to the Father and coming for the church at this point is not a closely related event. Notice what it says: nation rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, plagues, earthquakes in various places. These are the beginning of plagues. By the way, that's one of the things I have in this right here, just to show you this. And if you would like to read this, I'm sure it'd be okay to read this. I was asked to read basically write my chapter on the first three, 3.5 years. That's when the majority. These are times when there's all sorts of things going on because of the beast and some of these things. But when halfway through tribulation, God also begins to put a lot of things on people. So this is the outline of the first half of the tribulation period. And you got to go to Daniel's, looking in Daniel 9, Daniel 7, read these various passages, and read in Matthew 24, and all of a sudden you begin to find some of the first half of the tribulation and Israel. That becomes important. What a lot of people don't recognize is that God is going to set aside during the tribulation period opportunity for people to come to believe in Jesus. I didn't understand that until just a few years ago. It's amazing that was never talked about in classes I studied. But apparently there's time for people to repent. Matter of fact, I have a friend of mine who wrote a book. I wish I had it here. I can't figure out what I did with it. He says something about what to do during the tribulation or something like that. He has a book on the fact of people actually coming to Jesus during the time of the tribulation period. But you have 144,000 Jews that God sets aside to do evangelism during the tribulation period. All these things are really interesting because what happens in reference to Jesus' first coming, that's the rapture, it's only relating to the church at that time. But it doesn't relate to after the church leaves until all the way to the second coming, which is at the end of the tribulation period. Do you understand what I've said? Anybody? We're dividing out ideas here because there's been a lot of confusion in reading these things. Some people thinking the statements here in Matthew 24 talking about the rapture. Some people thinking that it's relating maybe only to the tribulation of the first portion or the second portion. The thing is divided out. This whole statement of Jesus is including several different points, and you have to run through these points. Not one thing is talked about, but more than one thing, several things. Okay? So I go through here and talk about Matthew 24, going to 1 Thessalonians, talk about it, various places that actually have references in the Bible to the concept of the first half, the 3.5 years of the tribulation. Another thing that's interesting is these riders in the book of Revelation. Riding horses, 4 of them. You ever heard of the four horses of the apocalypse? That's what it's talking about. This is also what Matthew's talking about. And this thing is going on. It happens at a very certain time after the rapture. It begins to take place. And one of these riders of the horse is the Antichrist, the beast, the man of sin. The other 3 relate to plagues and struggles and so forth. But the first rider becomes important. Okay? So you can read through these. I'm not going to go through and just let you get the ride on the red horse, the black horse, the zombie horse, or something he's pale. So the rise of the Antichrist, all those things that begin to occur during this period of time. And obviously, the first 3.5 years is not discussing everything, because the second 3.5 is also extremely important. Okay. Let me put that off for a second. Now, anything else I can sort of give you an idea here? I want to do that just so you'll have, because you haven't been to Israel, I thought I should give you a little understanding. But so anything else here? This is maybe a picture I had. Oh yeah, this is not I didn't take this picture. Somebody, drew this. But this is what was going on when the Romans came into Jerusalem. Okay. And there was fights going on, people being killed. It became a very difficult situation. Okay. So then it says, these are the beginnings. Then they will deliver you up to oppression and will kill you. Now, who is the you here? Then they will deliver you. Is he talking about delivering up the disciples? If you look at your timing, it can't be the disciples, because these things are still talking about the future. And the disciples of Christ didn't die in the fall of Jerusalem in any, say, AD 70. When he's talking about the you, he's most likely talking about the Jewish people. Understandable? See, so they'll deliver you up and will kill you. You'll be hated by of all the nations for my names. Many will stumble, will deliver one another, hate one another. False prophets will arise. All these events are going to happen. So we're talking about a fairly lengthy period of time. So how far are we from the time of Jesus when he said this? Okay. Yeah, about 2,000 years. So the fact is, iniquity will come. The good news of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world for all nations, and then the end will come. And some people take this for the statement, if we could just preach the gospel throughout the world right now, then Jesus would come. Are you familiar with that idea? And if we could just simply cover the world with the gospel, this passage would be fulfilled, except this passage is not discussing the coming of Christ for the church. It's talking about the tribulation period, see, not for the rapture itself. Good news of the kingdom, interesting how he says this, will be preached in the whole world for a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. When therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, you go back and read in Daniel that I mentioned earlier. Let them in Judea flee to the mountains, let him on the housetop run. These are things that are not talking about the rapture. These are things in the future, in reference largely to the Jewish people and to people that are won by them, probably. Now, you have lots of events here. You're going to read about these things here in verse 29 following. You'll find these things talked about in the book of Revelation. Okay, so it's these are things that occur after the time of the coming of Christ for the church. See, the church is unique. It's the bride of Christ. Has a specific function. And after the church leaves, God's still going to be working in the world. Sometimes in bringing judgment, sometimes in bringing salvation. And apparently, at the end of the tribulation, when Christ comes back, there'll have been a mass conversion of many in the world, including the Jewish people themselves. They will finally look upon the Messiah. That's what happens. So we miss it if we connect everything to the rapture, is the point I'm making. Now, don't get me wrong. If the rapture occurs now, I'm ready to go. I've already got my bags packed, ready to go. But that's only one facet, and that's not the one even being talked about Jesus here. Remember, the disciples' statement is about the destruction of the temple buildings, and when will these things be? And he's talking about the Jewish people. He's talking about all sorts of messiahs over history coming out, who claim to be. All these things have been occurring in the past for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. I don't know. Christ may be getting closer. We always say, yes, he's getting closer. And that's always true, by the way, because until he comes, he's closer. We don't know when he's coming, but he's coming for the church sometime. And but the thing is, the church is sort of a secret thing. We are always to be ready because he could come anytime. And so anyway, no one knows of that day or hour, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And of course, he talks about this coming is a second coming, obviously, when you read it. Okay? He's not really coming in the rapture and power and great glory as we think about it. It's a secret. It's coming and he's gone. And then people are going to look around and say, where'd everybody go? But it's not him coming. When he comes in power and glory with the angels, like you talked about in Mark 10 to the chief priest, when he says, tell us, are you the anointed one of God or not, or whatever he said, something like that. And Jesus says, yes, and you will hear the Son of Man, you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great glory. The Son of Man is a term from the Daniel 7 passage, which deals with Jesus being not the meek and mild lowly Jesus, but the one who's taking over for the Ancient of Days. And so it's sort of interesting that high priest was saying, I'm going to basically take care of you, Jesus. And Jesus said, well, okay, you'll be seeing me come back. And he's really telling the guy, you're going to have to deal with me later. And that's actually true, except he's not going to be real happy about it at the time. Okay, so anyway, that's what we got here. I don't know if there's any big thing you need to see. I just wanted you to have an experience of sort of looking at some things as we talked. This, by the way, is Ronnie Reich and me. Those are how big those places are in the wall. Big stones. That's one. I don't know who that is. He's quite younger than me. And then, but you have these various ruins from the destruction. You can get a feel. Look at this. This is the Western Wall, but not the Western Wall you see on television. This is a Western Wall 30 feet down from the one that people walk around on upstairs, so to speak. What they did, you had a wall. I mean, it used to be a much higher area. And then what happened is that they had to dig out 30 feet down to get to the first century level. I used to always tell people on a tour, I said, today you're walking where Jesus walked 30 feet above. You got it? We're walking where Jesus walked 30 feet above. In other words, he was up there. We're down here now. So it varies. Here you have some of the stones like we looked at. Some of the shops that people had sold things here, probably, doves and various things for sacrifice. And this is in the south, going down to the city of David.
So that's all excavation work?
Yes, that thing we were looking at, see, I can show you. This is what it sort of looked like initially. You'd had this here. They have recovered the thing here. This right here, you see, that's gone. But over here, there's still sticking out of the wall the stone that it connected to. Okay, because it just apparently somebody broke it just like that. That's what at least the archaeologist Reich told me. He said this was cleaved in one blow, the way it was found. But this right here is ground level, but over 2,000 years it got a little higher because they built more and more on it over the years. And so this is where people walked down the Western Wall and down south to the temple area to get in. If you're a priest, you'd go this way probably. So that's what you have there. Let's see if I get back. I don't want to punch something. Okay, now, so there's that. But then what I showed you earlier, if I can find that one again. Here we go. The temple here was destroyed. These walls were not destroyed. There were a lot of them were broken at the top and the down. Of course, the Mount of Olives here. What was I going to show you here on this thing? Yes, here. See the ruin?
Oh,
See,
yeah.
that would have been those buildings there that people had shops in, selling things and so forth.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, let's continue. We're going to move off this now in Matthew 24 and look at it more in some PowerPoint presentation. Okay. Any other questions before we launch? I thought you might enjoy looking at some of the stuff since we're talking about it, and maybe it might cause you to want to go sometime. Not necessarily with me, even though that would be the best tour. But no, you ought to see my tours are great. But
When you said one's being scheduled for next year, when is that? Do you know?
I'm trying to put it together now because all during this COVID stuff. Hey, I thought of it. COVID.
Yeah.
The COVID stuff. I really couldn't do much because they were sort of not flying people in,
Right.
and then after all of that, then you started having the issue with the terrorist. And I had a friend who took a group, and he's taken lots of groups there. And when he got there, he thought everything was going to be okay. It looked like it calmed down a little bit, but half of the sites that you would normally go to were closed down by the state.
Mm.
So they only had half a tour, and they spent their money to get there. So I'm
Yeah.
very careful. I'm looking at things very carefully because when I go, we have a great tour because my purpose of a tour is not just to have a lot of fun. We do have fun, but we stay in great places. But I want people to learn more about how to understand the Bible.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, that's the reason I even did the study Bible. I was sitting in Caesarea Philippi one day, and I had just explained Matthew 16 and your Messiah, you're Peter and so forth, all that in Matthew 16. And I let them go out and look around, and I sit down usually in prayer, meditate, and just think. And it came to me, I would really wish I could bring more and more and more people here because I love to explain the Bible to them where you can see what it's talking about. And then I thought, what I need to do is take it to people and not just expect them to come with me, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's what got the study Bible going. I came back and told my late wife, I said, I think the Lord wants me to do this.
Mm.
And so I have invested an amazing amount of time and money into producing something so that when you read the Bible, you can see what it's talking about. So I've got videos, I've got tons of charts and graphs and archaeological stuff and photos and everything imaginable. I'm trying to make it so that when a person reads the biblical text, they can then interact with the biblical text and understanding it. That's my whole thing.
Definitely adds to your perspective. I've been in Lebanon and Jordan, and just being there and thinking about the scriptures and the fact that like these are areas where biblical characters actually walked and lived, and
Yeah.
like it definitely changes how you view some of the text.
Oh, it's amazing you to see and in this respect, when you're there, you can smell it, you can experience it many ways. I can't give you the smell over the online study Bible, but on the other hand, you can see with your eyes what it's talking about. I put archaeology stuff, I put pictures, everything imaginable. I try to provide so that when you're reading the text, the text makes sense.
Hmm.
And so that's why I have it.
Yeah,
It's
very cool.
it's modestly called the House Visual Study Bible.
Well, thank you for your work on that.
Well, I appreciate the thought. I did the Nelson Study Bible years ago, the best-selling in America. Spent 8 years on that with 40 scholars working and being paid for by Thomas Nelson. But and that was a major achievement, but we never accomplished this task.
Yeah.
And I thought this is something I know how to do, and having done the other one. And I've been working on it very, very hard, but it's I need more and more people to sign up to help me pay for it. because I've taken film crews, I've taken camera people, I've taken thousands of photos. I've everything imaginable to try to capture it all. But not only with Israel, I've done it in Turkey, in Greece, in Jordan, in Egypt. The places the Bible talks about, I've got some stuff on it. And plus the fact that I've spent my life studying all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let me get off me. This is not about me, but but I think you can gain a lot of benefit if you want to. By the way, Bible Hub, which is more people use Bible Hub than any other tool on the internet, over 80 million links a year. And they have now begun to try to advertise me because the guy who owns the thing asked me if I'd be on his board. And I said, sure. And so now he's actually begun to put things on his site and push some stuff. So we'll see how that happens. Anyway, let's keep going. I don't want to continue this forever, but we need to get back here on site.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
I remember I heard a pastor say, speaking of the rebuilding of the temple, and these pictures kind of reminded me of what he was saying. He said he was on a tour, and they took him to like where the Temple Mount is. Like our textbook talks about how they don't understand how exactly, the logistics of how the temple will be rebuilt, given I guess there's Islamic things there. But this pastor said he was shown, like, obviously you couldn't have the entire temple, but what we actually have available to build, you could build enough to start the sacrificial system again.
Well,
and apparently he was told that there's already plans to do that.
Well, I'm sure there are people. There's a temple organization in Israel that actually already has a chief cornerstone built for them, and they have a lot of the garments, and so it's like in a place inside the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem. But having said that, though, it is going to be a major issue because when they get rid of the Dome of the Rock, I thought maybe one of the missiles from Iran would hit it sometime or something. That would, get astray and go off the link and hit it and poof, and say, well, since you don't have a mosque there anymore, we'll just go ahead and take it over. But it's hard to say how it's going to happen because it's not going to be an easy task. But it could be that after the rapture, when God begins to work out his new thing, remember the Antichrist is said in the Bible, in Revelation, that he sits in the temple and declares himself to be a god. So there will be a temple there sometime in the but I don't know when. But right now it would be a war to get rid of the mosque. So, okay, well, let's keep moving. So I'm sort of showed you some things here that there's issues. Let me move over here then, and we'll come back to the Bible when we need to get that. But the setting of the Olivet Discourse, then, if you'll look in the passage, and we only looked at a small portion, in 21 through 24, basically, you have this discussion. Jesus is teaching them. And there is, you have statements of judgment and condition for a second coming, but that doesn't necessarily mean the rapture. And there's a comment on the temple itself. They say, when will it be? What will be the sign of your coming? And we've already said some things about that. When will these things be? When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Well, if that's talking about Rome, then we got a real problem because that occurred in AD 70. Here we are in 2026. So, we are a long ways from that. So this didn't happen. Now, there are people called preterists. You know the term? It's one of the views. It's not pre-trib. Preterism says essentially that everything has been fulfilled. Now, you have two kinds of preterists. But where you say everything's been fulfilled that has to happen, we're now in the millennial period. And I say, if this is it, boy, we got problems. I'm really expecting far better than this. But they have, that Jesus came spiritually, and now he's in the church and the world, and so there is no future things like that. That's one way to look at it. You have a hard preterism, a soft preterism, and the question of Christ coming uh, without some kind of clear evidence, and it's just spiritual, doesn't seem to fit the scriptural passage at all. But that's a preterist view. Of course, then you have a mid-trib view. A lot of people hold, and a post-trib view, and a past-trib view. They have several views. We'll talk about some more of these. When you see Jerusalem surrounded, then recognize her desolations at hand. So this is clearly not talking about Jerusalem in AD, 30 or whatever you want to put it. Okay, because if that's fulfilled, then like I say, all this other stuff doesn't make any sense anymore. I hate to think this is the millennium. Okay, now going on down, what will be the sign of your coming? And then he answers it in three different places. And Matthew and Mark and Luke discusses the fact the sign of your coming and the end of the age. Remember the end of the age. What age are we talking about? What's the age referred to?
It's the church age.
Well, it could be the church age, the end of the age, the sign of your coming and the end of the age. And there is clearly a beginning and an ending to something here.
Well, the disciples were asking the question. So my thinking would be, like, when are you coming to overthrow Rome?
I'm sure they were thinking that.
Right? Yeah,
And just about every Jew was thinking that.
right.
But that wasn't what Jesus was thinking about.
Correct.
And of course, he's sort of ambiguous here then. See, he doesn't lay it all out, because even the things that he mentions, if you go back and read it again, if you mention all the Messiahs, a lot of them coming, many will come in my name, and all the events that will occur, and all the earthquakes that occur, these things are things that have occurred for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it's hard to connect that to what we think of as the time of Christ coming to pick the church up. Okay? And you can go ahead and read these passages and work through them. I'm not going to do that right now. We'll hit it in a second. So let's get our perspective again. You got the church age, you got a tribulation period, and you got a millennium. Then you have eternity. By the way, over here you have eternity too, in a sense. It's saying God, when there was nothing but him, created what was not him. See? And it's hard to even define the concept in the mind of God, what is eternal. It's because there is a certain point that time began. And now that time relates to us. It really doesn't so much relate to God. Okay. So the end of the age could refer, as you said, it could refer to the end of the church age, or it could be referring to the end of the age, anticipating the new heavens and new earth, because that moves to eternity again. We will be eternal in the sense not that we are God, but we'll be eternal in the sense that there's never an ending to us. 100 trillion years from now, we'll still be there. And 1,000 trillion years will be there. Eternity is a difficult thing to think about. But before there was anything, there was God. And the fact is, now that he's created something out of nothing by simply his word, then there is a new heavens and a new earth ultimately, which will go on forever, in which God will fulfill all his purposes there. These things are really hard to think on. Anybody who claims to understand it doesn't. Okay? Now, So there you have the church age. There's the church of the rapture. Judgment seat of Christ is down here. Notice, what is here? What happens here, I wonder?
At the judgment?
If you have a rapture, what occurs after the rapture for believers?
The Bema seat?
Members of the church, right? The
Yeah.
bride of Christ. I don't know. I've had people say that, yes, and maybe that's so. But the point of it is, I think rather than it says a marriage supper of the Lamb here, it's at least something that is this judgment seat is not a judgment of, your name found in the book of life or not. Remember that the book will be opened,
Mm-hmm.
and if your name is not found there, then bye-bye. Depart from me, who worked iniquity and so forth. That's over here. So you have some kind of judgment. This is probably a judgment like Paul talks about, 2 Timothy chapter, was it 4 or 5, where he mentions the fact that we'll receive a crown
Mm-hmm.
according to what we've done. So I don't know all that means. I mean, I'm talking in just, I don't know any more than anybody else knows of what exactly this is. The fact is, we are rewarded for our works. I had a guy got real mad at me in church one day that he said, "Not, I think all Christians get the same thing." And I said, "Well, Paul didn't seem to think so. Because according to your works, you receive a reward." Now, I don't know how that works, but he received a crown of righteousness. So whatever God decides to give, I'll be happy with, I'm sure. Okay. So we have the church here. You have a tribulation period. Hades is here. And remember that the false prophet and the beast and Satan will be in a in-between period here, waiting for the millennium to be done, after which then he'll be dealt with. So we have these things going on during the tribulation period, which is 7 years, and then 1,000 years, and the new heavens and the earth, which is eternity. Again, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. It's really hard to know exactly what some of these things are actually going to be. But what you have is a church age during this time here, and then you have things here going on, in which is also further judgment. We're not going to be here, and then the millennial period. Keep it going. Now, parallels between the Olivet Discourse and the sealed judgments of Revelation. By the way, I'm going to give you a break in 10 minutes. Just hang in there. Parallels between the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, actually, and it's dealing with several chapters there, between the Olivet Discourse and the sealed judgments of Revelation. Go to Revelation and compare it with these passages of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That's the reason I put it up here. That is, you will be able to watch this video if you want. You can go back and pick it up. I can't take the time to read all of this for you. But the point of it is, Revelation and Matthew, Mark, and Luke fit together. Because why? They're talking about the Olivet Discourse, the end of the age. So when you read these passages, my article that should you ever choose, I just like to share things with people if they want it. But my article, which is part of the book that Holden did, he was one of my former students, was on the beginning of the tribulation. That's halfway through. There's a lot of things. You know who's really doing things at the second half? That's God says, "I'm going to fix you." The beast only really has a real good time, the first portion, because after that, God brings judgment on the world. And so it's a different scenario between the first and second half. And at the end, many people have repented, become saved. This only hit me a few years ago. I thought, what happens to all those other people? If you during the tribulation, if you've asked forgiveness, God is so gracious and merciful that even at this stage, he still will forgive if people will ask forgiveness. it's not a vindictive God. It's a God who operates under righteousness. He's not going to give up righteousness, but he also operates with mercy and grace.
Amen.
So even during that time, there'll be people that come to Christ, and including hundreds of thousands of Jews who'll say, boy, Zechariah, they looked upon the one whom they, see, what does it say? He comes and said, they look on the one that they, well, I can't think of the term now. I'm having my little thing here.
Look upon the one they have pierced.
Yeah, that's thank you very much. They look upon the one they pierced, and a nation will be born in a day, it goes on to say. I mean, the Jews as a group of people one day will actually find salvation, and they'll receive the promises of Abraham, which are unconditional, unilateral. Remember, as long as there are stars in the sky, that covenant's in force. As long as God exists, that covenant's in force. The covenant with Israel is going to be fulfilled to Abraham. And most, a lot of people think the church took all that over. If you ever want to read an article on that, I've got one in a book with Tommy Ice, where I dealt with that whole question. The fact is, the promises are unilateral, unconditional, eternal. It never quits. So anyway, so you see these various kinds of things, false messiahs, wars, and famines and pestilences. These are all things talked about in Matthew. These are also things happening in Revelation. And that's the point. I hope you caught that. Now, as far as interpretive methods, I've gone through this before, I think, with you, if not a former class. The issue of knowing the difference between two statements or two ideas. The question is similarities versus dissimilarities. For example, I think and God thinks, so I must be God, right? I mean, I'm trying to find really something stupid. But you have people. The fact is, there are things that are common to us and God. There are things that are common to everything in creation. To be similar is not to be the same. And that's where people make some real mistakes. For example, in Genesis, we have some I call them neo-evangelicals now, because they just can't seem to, they keep getting worse and worse and sound more and more like the Bultmann and friends, where Bultmann said he can't accept the resurrection of Jesus from the grave because science doesn't allow that. Boy, Jesus didn't understand that. He would have stayed in the grave, I guess. If only he had known science prohibited it. See, it's a nonsensical statement. Jesus came back from the grave. For Bultmann, he says, well, he arose in my heart. Like I say, if he didn't rise in real, then he didn't rise in your heart either. So we have to get these things, the difference between similarity and dissimilarity. And you can see that a bush and a tree have similarities, many similarities. They have wood, they have leaves, they have certain functions, they receive water for sustenance. They are similarities. But similarities and dissimilarities are not the same. This is important because there are people who look in the Genesis account and they can't seem to understand that what the whole concept of interpretation from what you see in the text. And we're going to see that example also working in the rapture issue in just a moment. Oh, by the way, I know what thing, because I just thought of something. It just dawned on me as I was looking here. Have you gone to my website yet? My new website. It's very hard to get to. It's called hwhouse.com. If you type in hwhouse.com in the browser, it opens up I think I've got about 20 or 30 lectures on this very topic we're having here, in the sense of ecclesiology and eschatology and so forth. I have about, 15 maybe things on Bible archaeology. And I'm doing one, I've been doing one every Monday night for a long time. And then I'm putting all my articles that I've done, and I've done about 150 articles. So I'm gradually finding them as I go through stuff and sending them off to the guy to put them in. But you can find most of anything I have if you want to and read free of charge and, take it off and use it however. Although you can't use it in the sense of, it's something I copyrighted, but you can use it in your ministry any way you want. Okay, moving on down, we're just about there. Now here we have the distinguishing, see the difference between similarity and difference. That's why reading Matthew 24 could seem to be the rapture, but there's similarities, that's for sure, but there's greater differences than there are similarities. A cow and a horse are both mammals, but they both have tails, both have hooves, both have fur, both have big tongues, big noses. There's all sorts of things that are similar between a cow and a horse. But you don't look for the similarity, you look for the dissimilarity. You with me? This is how I read a book by E.W. Hirsch. Is it E.W.? Anyway, the last name of the guy is Hirsch, H-I-R-S-H-H. Every time I teach a doctoral course in hermeneutics, which was my doctoral area, the question of meaning and interpretation, that's where I spent my time thinking, is so important. Hirsch helps you to understand what I'm talking about. And the fact is that what you look for when you read stuff is to see how are they like and how are they different, because the creation stories of the ancient world and the creation in the Genesis have similarity, but largely dissimilarity. So they're not discussing the same thing, but they do have points in common. You understand what I'm saying? This is what I mean by the bushes. And so always look for the dissimilarities to understand whether it's talking about what you think it is. Okay? So the coming of Christ in both places, the revelation and the rescue. The rescue is the rapture. The coming of Christ is true in both. Coming in the clouds is true in both. And after that, it changes. It's largely dissimilar between the second coming and the rapture. That's my point. Are there things that make it look like it's the same? Yes, it does. Is it the same? No, it's not. And you see my examples I gave with the bush and the cow and all. A truck and a car are similar, but they're not the same. They have similar functions, made of similar kinds of things, but there's so much that's different than the same. So that's what we need to keep as we work through hermeneutically here. The apocalyptic Son of Man and this Revelation, the Revelations, we talk about what's in the Revelation of John and the fact of the second coming. Christ the Savior is different from the apocalyptic Son of Man. Now, distinguishing the revelation of Christ from the rescue. How are we doing? I'm going to have to give you guys a break. We'll come back and continue. Uh, uh, hmm. All right, you back? Anybody back? Not yet.
I'm back.
Okay.
Joey's back.
He's having some dinner. All righty. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and go on, assuming everybody's here. So I think what I've said so far probably should make sense of what I'm having the slide. There are distinguishing marks between a rapture and a second coming. In Matthew 24, and also all around it in the discussion, as well as what we see in other passages of Scripture, distinguishes a time of Christ coming with the angels to take charge over against coming back for his bride. There's a different issue. And so there are points of commonality, but they're not identifying the same event. So that's what I have here. Can you see the slide here? Okay. See the coming of Christ, both is coming. One is rescue, one is revelation. Coming in the clouds, coming in the clouds. You have angels present. Here you have an archangel only mentioned, not angels. You know, the messianic mission, watchfulness, judgment, all these things have commonality, but not similarity or not sameness. So distinguishing between the revelation of Christ from the rescue of Christ. And so you have to look at the passages very carefully to see exactly what it's talking about. I'm going to keep moving through this a little faster. Because there's a lot of this difference of opinion among Christians. Of course, you have some who are amillennial who just basically believe that Jesus will come back and bring an end to all things, and then the Christians will be in heaven with Christ forever. And that wouldn't be so bad, except that doesn't say what the text is saying, I don't think. And I gave examples last time. I'm not going to belabor this, but remember this. This is a good example of exactly what Jesus is talking about in John 14. He uses this as an illustration of what he's doing spiritually. He would have, every place he would have gone, he would have seen something like this. Okay? Any points? See, John 14 and 1 Thessalonians 14, I think, are talking about the same things. Whereas over here, I think they're not discussing the same things, see? That's the point. Are there any big questions on this? I think we've already hit this quite a bit, but I don't want you to be confused. You have to look carefully at the text. Lots of things in the Bible, not even this issue, lots of things in the Bible are very important to understand, and yet they're different from sometimes what we think they are. We're not reading the text carefully. You have to pay attention to words, context, and all this. Right. So the terms are that you find between 1 Thessalonians and John 14 clearly indicate that they're discussing the same thing. Just point after point after point after point, they're saying the same thing. That's different from something slipping in and being said, and it's different from the others. So here are some rapture passages. I don't think we have time to go through all these. You see how many there are? Rapture passages and second coming passages. You'd have to read all of these, and there's certainly, it would take us a number of class periods to even go through and read them, much less discuss them. But I thought you might want to have access to them to know something you go look for. And since you have access to look at the video again, you could always have it stop and make your notes or whatever you want to do, and then you could use it on. Any comment? Notice it says 70th week of Daniel. And so you need to go back and read Daniel 9, Daniel 7. There are passages that deal with questions that were not envisioned in most people's minds at that time. I think I've already given this to you, so I'll skip that one. So the Olivet Discourse, we've already gone through some of these things, but I want to take you into one specific study. So open up 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Boy, I tell you, I am stopped up. Can you hear that? I'm sorry. It's hard to breathe and cough and all this stuff. I've dealt with issues of the departure and the second coming and apostasy, all these things we've dealt with prior to here. But here we're at a passage that there's a big issue. And I just got through giving a lecture on this at a conference in Dallas just a few weeks ago, and trying to deal with the question of what is called the apostasia. And I did that. Afterwards, I saw that I had some things I need to correct because there was a little confusion. For example, I had the dictionary form there instead of the form in the text that I was reading. So I got some things I need to fix on it, so I'm not going to publish it publicly now until I have a chance to make those little corrections. But the basic issue is still the same, and I want to point it out to you, because there have been some who've been arguing recently in pre-tribulational settings that 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, you're looking at it. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. If you look at it, there are people who see the word apostasia, but it's been transliterated as apostasy, or the word falling away. The Old King James put the word falling away. Others have translated apostasy. Looking in the Greek, some have said that, well, it refers to the idea of being someone who's fallen away or someone who's apostate. My argument was that that is not accurate. In fact, it's a dangerous thing, and this has occurred a lot. It's a dangerous thing to take a Greek word or a Hebrew word and make an English word of it and then give it meaning that then changes the actual meaning of the word in the Greek and the Hebrew. I think I have an example of that here. Let's see. I'll get to, I think. Well, I don't see it right now, so maybe I'll just give it to you separate. Here's the Greek word. If you can look at this, it's the Greek word apostasia. It has some similarity in English, you can see. apostasia. And people transliterate it. You know what transliteration means? It takes another word, and instead of translating it, the meaning, it makes it another word that's used in the language you're going to go into. And this is done sometimes for various reasons, but it takes away the meaning of the word here. The word apostasia is found, I went through about the 10th century before Christ and started working through literature on it. You find it many, many times, and yet there are people who say it's something that didn't occur in ancient times. Well, it occurred in the 10th century, the 9th century, the 7th, all the way to the 1st century, and so forth. But over time, there is change sometimes in words, but sometimes there's not very much change. The King James translation is the first translation that took this word and made another word from it different from what had been understood previously. Translation after translation after translation in English put the word departure, D-E-P-A-U-R-C, D-E-P-A-R-T-U-R-E, departure. They translated it fallen away. Now, there was a big complaint, there was a big fight going on between the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church. And I think that it was changed from apostasia, that is the idea of departure, to falling away to make it a negative against individuals who did not agree probably with what was going on with King James in the group. Things like this occur a lot. But you have to be real careful. For example, Jolie, have you been baptized?
Yeah,
Was it by sprinkling you or pouring water on you or by immersing you?
it was by, well, we talked about this last class, but I was baptized as an infant by sprinkling, and then I got rebaptized when I was saved by immersion.
Are you baptized if it's by sprinkling based on the meaning of the word?
No.
No. That is, the word baptizo or baptismos, which is a verb, which is a noun form, is a word which means to submerge, to put under, to dip under. So you can't really have a immersion by pouring, unless I guess I poured water on you in a tub until you drown. I don't know. But the point is, you understand that the people have taken a word in Greek and they made a word in English that is like that word, and then they use it and convey a new meaning that's not the original meaning. See, and we do it all the time. So when I started doing an investigation of this, I wrote a paper on it several years ago, and then I wrote another one more recent. But I really took the time to check out from the 10th century all the way to the 2nd century AD to see to what degree there was consistency on the use of the term. What I discovered is that it is regularly used throughout history to mean a departure. That is, moving and going from this place to that place. Sometimes it's used like this: a person departed from a marriage, what we call divorce. It is used that way, but it's a leaving something. It's a departure, even if it's not dealing with the idea of so much a physical moving. You find that the word changes form. For example, the Greek term is ephistemi, which means to leave or to depart. That's used consistently throughout the literature, but you gradually move to the time when you have the particular word, it changes the form a little bit. Like before it became the word apostasia, it had a word apostasin. So it's a little variation in spelling. But we find that in English all the time. There's a lot of words in English, if you'll go back and check them, they were spelled a little differently than they are now, but the two words still mean the same thing because they're based on the same root. and they just vary a tiny bit, maybe one letter. But the issue, what do they mean? It still means the same thing. So what I did is I went through and checked this stuff out very carefully. This is a slide projection I put together for the meeting. Put it in here. And so I say here, my intent is not to argue that the Greek word apostasia in 2 Thessalonians is without question. It's hard to say without question for most things, particularly in an area in which there's some controversy. It's without question to be translated rapture or departure, or the noun should be translated on the New Text by the word departure, since such hubris is not best for dealing with a debate. Okay? The word is not uniform in meaning the New Testament passages, nor in many other outside the New Testament, having several meanings in its semantic domain. That is, words have meaning within a framework. They relate to each other. Okay? My argument is that the meaning of apostasia should be included in the text and should be done so, meaning departure rather than apostasy, a transliteration rather than a translation. That's the problem I'm dealing with, Jolie, is a person who would take and then they transliterate a word and then give a meaning to it that has nothing to do with the actual meaning. Okay? So, what I did, that stupid Nat's back, guys. He's not even allowed to be in class. Okay. So when you start going through the ancient literature I went through, you find that you also have to read a word in a context. Do you understand? Words have meaning within a contextual framework. And that's certainly true of this word. Over time, what you can find lexical examples, and you can find isolated instances of a word, but also you have to take a look at what the context of the word is. What I did, I took a listing because I decided I didn't want to do the whole 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th centuries. I started with the 6th centuries and went through the 2nd century AD, a century after Christ, during the time of the writing of the New Testament. And checked out the word ephistemi, that's the noun, that's a verb form, and the nouns apostasis and apostasia. Both are legitimate words meaning from ephistemi, which means to depart. You understand me? So it means to depart. We know historically the ephistemi, but then does apostasis and apostasia mean depart? It means departure. Why? Because why did I say it doesn't mean to depart? It means departure. Because one is a noun, one is a verb. See, let's see, what's an example I could give? To build. To build is a verbal form. Building is a noun. Does that make sense? The verb gives rise to the noun. It's always that way. Verbs give rise to nouns. And so you have build and building. They relate to one another, but one's a verb, one's a noun. But it's easy to understand. So what you do is you take a look at the forms and see what ephistemi means historically, and then what does it mean as a noun. So I went through and did all of that, checked it out carefully. So there's a historical background. Now, I mentioned this before. You have the famous rendering of falling away. You've got to watch translations. Please do. If you can, learn Greek, at least, maybe Hebrew, because you check it out against the original language if you can. Because how words are used is really quite an act that people do. Sometimes the way they manipulate words. Did I give the example to you last week about the meaning of using a word like to lift up versus to cut off? Did I discuss that with you on the vineyards? Yes or no? Did I discuss the issue of the idea of a vineyard is where you have a vine, and then you have branches that come from the vine, and the text in 15 of John, so many people translate cut it off, where it actually doesn't mean that at all. They took a Greek word, iro, don't pay attention to it, and totally misuse the meaning of the word. Has nothing to do with what people do in translation there. So I'm saying we have to be careful how we use words. So you find in Little and Scott, this is a major classical Greek lexicon, you find that the word ephiste means to remove, to withdraw, to depart. Sometimes intransitive, sometimes intransitive meaning. Transitive, it means it takes an object. Intransitive, it's like I am running doesn't take an object. See? So transitive and intransitive. So you have this word ephiste several times, many times, talking about a departure in some way, departing from a person, departing from a place, departure from an army, from a responsibility, whatever it may be, departure of some sort. That's what you're looking for. So the noun form carries some of the same flexibility, but it's used in many different ways in literature. So what you do when you check it through, you find out that the Greek word apostasia makes a lot of sense in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And we'll take some time to look at that in a few minutes. One of the foundational claims of those who oppose the view that apostasia in 2 Thessalonians 2:3 should be translated as departure is that the noun apostasia never refers to a physical or a spatial departure in Greek literature. Yet a careful examination of ancient sources tells a different story. So the point of it is, the word used in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and turning your Bible to that, and we'll just take a short time to go through this. But what you find in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is that there is a conflict of an argument going on. And in that you have Paul the Apostle, who's been using all sorts of terminology in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, particularly 1st Thessalonians, that he's talking about the coming of Christ for the church. And yet supposedly in 2nd Thessalonians, there's not an immediate kind of departure, but there is something that's being put in front of it, and that is the day of the Lord. So take a look at the passage, and I'll get to my Bible here. Okay, here, go to 2nd Thessalonians, Thessalonians for the chapter 1. Now, I'm going to actually put this in here. I haven't done it yet. But 2nd Thessalonians 1, now, brothers, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him. So let's see if we understand what that means. What is Paul talking about here? Well, you have to go back and look in 1 Thessalonians and see what did he talk about again and again and again. So we're going to run back here. I'm coming back to 2 Thessalonians. I'm going to go to first. I'm going to go to chapter 1. Now, you realize that the people at Thessaloniki, today that's how you say it. People say Thessalonica. But when they're looking at that passage, they're talking to people that had been recently converted to Christ by Paul's preaching. And he had spent some time with them on his way down to Athens, which is south of Thessalonica. And he had brought them to Christ. And so he got to Athens, and he eventually found himself in Corinth, where he worked in Corinth, where there were several things going on, and a lot of people, both Jews and Greeks, embraced Christ. But what occurs afterwards is that you have a person who came along, or I wrote a letter to the church, and was teaching that the day of the Lord, the day of judgment, had already come. So look here together. 1 Thessalonians, it goes on to say, we always give thanks to God for all of you, mentioning in our prayers, remembering without ceasing your work of faith and labor of love. He's writing a very nice letter to the church here. And you go into verse 9, for they themselves, these people that are that he's had an involvement with before, he says, they themselves report concerning us what kind of reception we had from you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve a true and are living in true God. The second thing, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. Now, when you read that, what do you think about that passage? What's it referring to?
The rapture?
Well, it's certainly it's this coming of Christ. So is this coming a rapture, or is it a coming in a second coming after a time of judgment? Remember, the second coming is a time when Christ comes in judgment. The first coming is the coming to take his people. But it's serious. See, notice the term, he delivers us from the wrath to come. Now, if you read the book of Revelation, you'll read the idea of the wrath that's to come. There's a wrath that's coming from the Antichrist. There's also a wrath coming from God of those who would follow the Antichrist. You have two things going on there. People who did not embrace the beast, the Antichrist, obviously received judgment from the Antichrist, but they received acceptance from God. Whereas there are other people that just simply, they are enduring wrath anyway from God when it happens halfway through tribulation. So this particular passage, wait from his Son from heaven. So you have one or two options for us here. But have you ever checked out before? I did one time. I went and looked up every single example of the day of the Lord used in the Bible. There's a lot of instances. And a day of the Lord refers to time when God judges the day of the Lord. So when he comes for the church, is he judging us in the sense of whether we are on or off the team?
No.
No. See, that's not why he comes. So here he raises us from the dead, his Son who comes from heaven, who delivers us from the coming judgment, which obviously is what is taught here. Go on to the next passage, see, chapter 2. And when you read this one, you also find the fact that, notice in verse 19, for what is our hope, our joy, our crown of rejoicing? Isn't it even you before our Lord Jesus at his coming for your joy and our glory? So here you have Paul again mentioning a future coming of Christ. Okay, that occurs here different times. Moving on, chapter 3. So you run through here, you just sort of have to look for them, but it's usually at the end. Here it says, May the Lord make you increase and abound in love toward one another and toward all men, even as we also do toward you, to the end he may establish your hearts blameless in holiness before our God and Father at the coming of our Lord Jesus with all his saints. Again, another coming. Chapter 4. This is, by the way, one of the most, significant portions of the Second Thessalonians. Start at verse 13. We don't want you to be ignorant, brothers, concerning those who have fallen asleep. He's talking about people that have what?
Died.
Died, yes. So that you don't grieve like the rest who have no hope. Pagans that did not accept Jesus don't have hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. There's that term again. Asleep in Jesus. For this we tell you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will in no way precede those who have fallen asleep. In other words, when Christ comes, you're not going to get a head start on people that are coming back from the dead and are in the graves. Then he explains, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with God's trumpet. The dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. That's a pretty strong statement here. Then in 1 Thessalonians 5, you have one more statement that talks about the coming of Christ. And so you can see that this is a focus in Paul's thinking, that if he mentions it in 5 separate chapters. And let's see, where's the passage here? If you find it before, let me know. Oh, here it is. Toward the verse 23. May the God of peace himself sanctify you completely. May your whole spirit, soul, body be preserved, blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. So you have 5 references to a coming of Christ for his people. So when you go to 2 Thessalonians, verse 2, chapter 2, you read this. Now, brothers, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him. Does that sound familiar? Yes? Yeah, he's been talking about it for the whole book. So he says, now concerning this coming of our Lord and our gathering together, we ask you not to be quickly shaken in your mind. See, remember when you read through 1 Thessalonians, all these passages, he's trying to reassure them regarding Christ's coming, regarding not having the wrath. He wants to assure them that the dead in Christ will rise first, and on and on. The point of it is. So if that were to happen, surely the people would know. See, I suspect when the rapture occurs in this world for us, we're going to go up to be with Christ. It's going to cause some problems in the earth. Don't you think so? I know the Left Behind series makes it happen, but I think it's true. I mean, if you have spouse that were not believers, or people down the street or next door or whatever, maybe you play football and you're in the middle of catching a pass and poof, you're no longer there. It probably would call some attention, don't you think? Right. And so the fact is, the rapture and gathering to Christ is something unique, and it's something that is noticeable. So it says, now concerning the coming, don't be quickly shaken in mind, either by spirit or word, and so forth, saying that the day of the Lord has already come. What is the day? What's the day of Christ? Somebody is saying to these people at Thessaloniki, that the day of Christ has already occurred. So what are the people going to think if somebody teaches them that Christ has already come? Would that pose problems?
I wonder if they missed it.
Yeah. It would cause all sorts of problems that, you know, that we're still here and he's gone. The day of the Lord already happened. Now, the day of the Lord here, I'm saying the day of Christ, because the day of the Lord, generally speaking, is a term for a judgment. And that's where we end up the next statement. Let no one deceive you in any way. See, the guy says, Christ has already come and you're still here. That's the problem with 2 Thessalonians. Christ has already come and you're still here. Somebody was teaching that false doctrine. But then we come to the next statement. Let no one deceive you in any way, for it will not be unless and notice the term in this translation I have, translation after translation after translation translates it wrong. My translation says, unless the rebellion comes first. But some people translate it like it's the man of sin comes first. Something comes first before, and what is it? Paul says, I think, for unless the departure comes first. And I'm basing that on 2 or 3 things. And look at this with me. You may make notes on this. You can also read my stuff after if you want to. Okay. Unless the something occurs first here. Something comes first. And connected to that, the man of sin is revealed, the son of destruction. Now, who do you think the man of sin and the son of destruction is?
Antichrist.
Antichrist, right. So this guy is saying, hey, listen, you guys already missed the rapture. Now all you got to look for is the fact that the Antichrist is here. And Paul says, no, because the Antichrist can't come until something else occurs first. Remember in chapter 1 of 1 Thessalonians, the coming of Christ for his people, and then the wrath occurs second. And notice what he says about this man of sin. He opposes and exalts himself against all that is called God or that is worshiped, so that he sits in as God in the temple of God, setting himself up as God. You see that example, what I just read here, you'll find that in the book of Revelation being talked about. It's also what is presumed to occur according to what you read in Matthew 24 and the other records that deal with the coming of the one who is the Antichrist. Can you see how these all connect together or not?
I think so. As I was reading all this, as you started talking about the apostasy word being mistranslated, that it should actually be departed, that actually I've always read this as kind of like Paul's talking about both the rapture and the second coming. And like, if you just in verse 1, to me, he's saying both. Now concerning the coming of our Lord, so the second coming, and our being gathered together to him, the rapture. And then he's kind of like, the rest of this is saying it's 2 separate things. Keep in mind, and it helps by saying that word is actually departed. It's like, keep in mind that the coming is not going to happen until the departure's already happened. So if you're still here as a church, the coming or the judgment, the day of the Lord, is not imminent. Hasn't already happened.
Well, see, I would say that what you look at in verse 1, the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering, the whole point of the coming is the gathering. The gathering is the effect of what the coming is, the cause.
I thought the second coming was at the end of the tribulation.
The second coming is coming. See, there's 2 comings. There's a pre-coming and a post-coming.
Okay.
At the end of the tribulation, Christ will come back with his holy angels and put an end to what occurred in the tribulation period. Okay, so you have Christ coming for the purpose of judgment and setting up his kingdom. There's also Christ coming back to take his bride back to be with him in heaven. So you have two comings, one coming as a coming of deliverance, another as a coming of judgment.
Right. And so, I mean, when we're gathered together, I guess that's like at the second coming, it talks about coming with his angels, and his angels will gather the elect from the four corners.
Yes, that is true in reference to the second coming, but this is not talking about the second coming of in the sense of coming at the end of the tribulation period. It's talking about the coming of Christ to gather the people that he's writing to at Thessaloniki.
Well, then why is he talking about all that other stuff that happens during the tribulation, like the man of lawlessness?
The man of lawlessness is the Antichrist,
mm-hmm.
and he will actually arise to power during the first portion of during the first portion of the tribulation period.
Right. So the rapture would have already happened.
The rapture will have occurred, and the people of God would have been gathered to Jesus at that point.
Right. And he's saying that day, in verse 3, that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed. It's all in the same sentence.
I'm saying, but the word rebellion here is the word apostasia, which is wrongly translated rebellion.
Right. Yeah, the departed actually helps my point, what I'm saying. My point is that I think when he's saying for that day, he's not referring to that day being the rapture, because he's saying that won't happen until the departure happens and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, so on and so forth. But the point is that day that I'm saying will not happen until the man of lawlessness is revealed. So it can't be the rapture, because the rapture's already occurred once the man of lawlessness is revealed.
I agree with you. No, the rapture does occur. The gathering to Christ in the rapture occurs before the man of lawlessness is revealed. The man of lawlessness is revealed beginning with verse 3b.
Mm-hmm.
Let no one deceive you anyway, for it what? It refers back to the gathering, for it will not, see.
Yeah, my translation says that day will not come.
No, let me go back. Because he's interacting with this guy that wrote this letter to the church, or came right here. So he said, don't be quickly shaken and your mind are troubled by someone who said something or a letter he sent saying that the day of the Lord has already come. The guy's already said to the church at Thessaloniki that Christ has already come. It's already over. Jesus came and you missed it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Paul's saying that's not accurate, because you won't miss it, because the departure must occur before the man of sin is revealed. So the man of sin cannot be revealed right now. Because, see, the man of sin cannot be on the stage doing anything, because the gathering has not yet occurred. Paul says one must precede the other.
It doesn't make sense to me in context there. It says, for it, or that day, whatever, will not be unless the departure comes first and the man of sin is revealed. So,
well, I agree. The departure must occur before the man of sin is revealed.
mm-hmm.
That's for sure.
But the way that is reading is it's saying it, whatever it is. My translation says that day. So that day that he just talked about will not be unless the departure comes first and the man of sin is revealed. So it and that day cannot be the departure. It says they're two separate things clearly in that phrase.
There are two separate things. One thing is that the rapture must occur first, and then the man of sin can be revealed after that.
No, I'm saying the two different things that I'm talking about are it, that first phrase. It is different than the rebellion or the departure.
Well, see, in the Greek, that's the thing you have to look at here. Look at this with me. For it will not be, what will not be? The it refers back to what the guy who's lying to the church about. He's telling him that the day of the Lord's already over, excuse me, he's telling them the rapture's already occurred, the day of the Lord has already started, and then Paul's saying that won't happen until this happens. So the question is, what is the it happens first, and then you can have the man of sin second happen. So this so-called word here, apostasia, must occur. This event must occur before this occurs. And the
Yes.
guy who's talking to them is saying, this has already occurred and you missed this. He said,
Yeah,
don't
I
worry
get what
about
you're
it.
saying. I get what you're saying, but it's saying so it. Okay, I'm not being very clear. So the way I'm reading that is the it, or in my translation, that day is a different thing than the rebellion or the departure. And so when he's saying it,
Well, I agree with
this
that. I agree with that. Fact
okay,
is,
so the departure is part of the rapture, right?
the departure is the rapture.
Okay, and so that comes first, and
And
so
then
what?
the
And
man
so
of
it
sin,
is still left to happen the way I read that. So
yeah, well, see,
what is still left to happen then? It.
the guy who wrote this, the guy who Paul is interacting with, he's telling them that you guys missed the rapture.
Yeah, I get that. The whole
And
reason he wrote this.
so that you are actually now in the day of the Lord of God's judgment and the man of sin. And Paul's saying that doesn't happen because you haven't missed the rapture. It must occur before the man of sin. And
Right,
you're
that's what I'm
still
saying. That's what I've been saying all along. Is that in my mind,
okay.
he's saying, don't worry about being subject to the second coming, the day of the Lord, the judgment of God,
Right.
whatever, all those things,
Because the
whatever
rapture
terms you want
occurs
to use.
first.
He's saying, yeah, because the departure would have already happened, and
And,
the Antichrist would have already been revealed, and
and you
it's
know
like,
what? And if the departure had happened, guess who would have already been taken then? Paul, the church.
right, yeah,
So
exactly, and
yeah,
that's all I'm saying is that to me, what he's saying is that concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus and our gathering, again, I think he's talking about two separate events.
I
And then
agree
he's
with you.
saying our
So that's
gathering couldn't have happened yet, or you're not subject to the judgment. Don't worry about, because in my mind, what they're thinking is if they're being deceived by that idea that like, hey, we're getting ready to suffer God's judgment because the rapture's already happened and we're still here, so oh my God, we're going to be subject to the judgment. He's like, hey,
and
concerning that, think about it. It's not true because the departure hasn't happened. The man of lawlessness hasn't been
right.
revealed,
Yeah.
and
But see
that's all
that
I'm saying
but
is that
see
he's saying that this two
see the
it's
bad
two
guy
events. He's
though.
talking about he's to me it's a great illustration of how and it defeats a lot of the like the post millennial ideas
Yeah, but the bad
that
guy here,
because they're
see
not two separate because they are two separate events. Clearly, right here he's saying two
the,
separate things.
the bad guy though has been telling them that they missed it all and now they're stuck. And Paul's
Right,
saying you're not stuck because you haven't been raptured. But let me
right.
go here, let me do this. Here's the word rebellion that we're talking about. And this particular word is the word apostasia. And it did not mean the idea of rebellion as we're using here when it was first done in the time before and during the time of the first century. And I want to go in and talk to you about that here. Let's go over here and look at the terms. But I think we're together now, Doug. Okay. Now, the lexical range and Greek usage of apostasia. This is important. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is important. In light of this data, the claim that no such usage exists is not only inaccurate, that is, many who are arguing this say that the word means rebellion there. It does not mean departure. We'll just say departure. And they'll say that that's so, and it does not refer to the rapture per se. Now, they say this, it's demonstrably false. Our goal is not to deny that apostasia can sometimes refer to rebellion or defection. There might be instances, words can be used more than one way, especially in theological context, but to show that such usage must be determined by context and not by lexical absolutism. What I'm saying is, even if you could demonstrate that somewhere it's used for rebellion, it doesn't make any sense to put it here that way because it becomes redundant in its usage. I think we've discussed that, Doug. That's the point. And so what you see is that when you examine the word aphistemi, the verb, apostasis and apostasia, those words, they carry the concept in Greek literature for the idea of a withdrawal or a separation or departure. So what you would say, and there's something in Greek here that needs to follow that I need to point out, and that is when you see this word, did I go back too far? No, that's not it. Hold on, give me a second. Maybe I can't figure out where it is. Anyway, the point of it is here that in the Greek, you have a example called the anaphoric use of the article. So this is a term you don't have to know, but grammatically, and you can read my article on it. I'm going to make it available if you want. But if you check the Greek and how it uses the language, you use an article in Greek that goes with a noun, and it refers back to something just said above that makes sense with it. In other words, it flows from it. And so what you have here is just saying, Paul says, can't figure out where I have that passage I was reading. Where is it? I'm trying to find the text stuff. Or if I went the wrong way. I know what I'll do. I'm just going to get to my translation here.
That was the one that's the slide you were on.
That's what I was doing anyway. Yes, thank you very much. I thought something's wrong. Okay, so what this is saying, in Greek, it's pretty plain. I went to the grammar. Some people who've been arguing this other view, they didn't interact with grammar at all. All they did is they went to a lexicon and tried to come up with their viewpoint. But in Greek, you have examples of how verbs use and how what they don't do and what they do and so forth. So you have to understand the grammar of the Greek. It says, let no one deceive you in any way, for it will not occur unless this occurs first. And this is an article in Greek. This is a noun in Greek, if I were to put it there. And it says, unless the departure I just talked about occurs, then the man of sin will be revealed. See, this guy said the Son of Man's already here. Paul is saying, don't be concerned because this has got to happen. And this cannot happen until this happens. So the way the grammar works is that the apostasia must occur before the man of sin can be revealed. And Paul says that hasn't happened. Matter of fact, had it happened, Paul wouldn't be writing this letter to him because he'd be gone also. You get my point?
Yeah.
So he's writing this letter and he says that couldn't have happened because the departure must occur first. And he uses the article in an anaphoric method. And all the grammars, I've got every Greek grammar you can imagine, and all the Greek grammars say the same thing on this, that it refers to that which has just been recently discussed above. And so that's how the Greek works here. So this actually sort of really hits a hole in this. But there's something else here. Notice what he does. Read on down with me. So this guy that's going to be revealed opposes and exalts himself above all that's called God. He sits as God in the temple. We know who this is. Don't you remember when I was still with you, I told you all this stuff, Paul says. I explained all this already. Don't you remember what I taught? I mean, I can understand Paul as a teacher. When he again and again, he went over this and the students still didn't get it. So you guys get it right now. So the point of it is, Paul says, when I was with you, I told you all this stuff. Now you know, now here, pay attention to this. What is that? That says, now you know what is restraining him. See, something is keeping the man of sin from coming to power. Now, Doug, when you look at this, what in verses 1, 2, and 3 tells you what is keeping the man of sin from coming to power? or anybody else, it's fine.
Says the departure hasn't happened.
Right. That's it. That's the point. Paul's saying you cannot have the man of sin because you don't have the departure yet. And then he goes here and he says, don't you know what restrains him? What? It's a neuter use of the word, a neuter, not a masculine. What is restraining the man of sin to the end that he may be revealed? He's going right back to verse 3. You see that? Because that's a what? Something is keeping him from being revealed. And the only thing in the context is the departure. He says, for the mystery of lawlessness already works. Only there is one who restrains him. Now you got another issue. Something restrains him, and I would say in context, Paul has argued that something is this thing that refers right here back to right here in grammar. So there's only there is one who restrains. Who do you think restrains the man of sin from coming forth?
Jesus.
Jesus, the Father, or the Spirit? I would suggest it may be, based on Paul's arguments, the Holy Spirit. Because what did the Spirit do on the day of Pentecost? Jesus said, go wait into Jerusalem until you be endued with power from on high, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Spirit came on the day of Pentecost. On what did he come?
All the believers.
The church. Yes, the church. All
Mhm.
believers. So who is indwelt by the Spirit? The church. What is going to depart to go be with Christ?
Ah, yeah.
The church. So the fact is there's someone who's restraining him, and there's something that's restraining him. I would argue contextually, now you know what is restraining him is the rapture. That's restraining him. He can't come until it happens. And the Spirit who indwells the church, that departs with the church, also has not been taken out of the way. Now continue reading. Then the lawless one will be revealed. After all this, then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will kill with the breath of his might and destroy by the manifestation of his coming. Now, what coming is this? Remember, the Antichrist can't come until after the departure, until after the being restrained by someone. But after this period of time, the Lord will actually kill the Antichrist and the one who's working in the works of Satan. That, in fact, becomes the second coming. So you have the first coming and the second coming continue referred to. One happens, then the other happens, and there's something in between. Notice, even whose coming is according to the working of Satan, we know that the Antichrist, with all the power and lying wonders, with all the deception of wickedness of those being lost, because they didn't receive the love of truth. Because of this, God sent us a powerful delusion that they would believe a lie, and so forth. So you have this major argumentation here, but when I look at it, when I check the grammar and the lexicons and the context, it seems to be saying that until Christ comes for his church, the Antichrist can't do a thing. And after Christ comes with the church, he will come back and he will destroy, and of course that's a few years later, he will destroy the Antichrist. These are very short statements, but anyway, that's the argument I made much more in depth than this, and you're welcome to the paper if you want to read it. But going through the whole question of context, grammar, word meanings, all those things are important to somehow getting passages like this. Okay. Any other
Yeah, hey,
comments?
actually, thank you for sharing that, because that's one that's actually tripped me up. That Second Thessalonians chapter 2.
Yeah, and it does other
Because
people too.
I used to be of the belief that the second coming and the rapture were the same thing,
Yeah.
describing something happening at the same time. But things like this really are helping me see the flaw in that way of thinking.
And you can read that when you read the thing that I have on this. I'll make it available here before long. I just got to tune it a little bit after a public address. But it helps if, and I'm not say, how do I say this? I don't mean in a demeaning way with this, but it really helps if you really get knowledgeable in Greek and
I'm horrible at foreign languages.
what?
I'm horrible at foreign languages.
Well, this is your opportunity to get past that. And so you work ahead and do it, because if you understand how it works in the Greek, you have to understand how people use the words and languages. One of the guys who was arguing contrary to this at the conference I was, he had never studied Greek grammar at all. And he kept making these outlandish statements and publishing a little book he gave out, he sold to people at the conference and all this stuff. And I got up, and when I left the conference and I was walking out of it, he walked next to me and he says, I guess I should study Greek grammar. And I said, yes, that would be very helpful. Because he didn't understand. He thought that verbs do not actually cause nouns, and they actually do. I gave all sorts of examples of verbs and the noun form from the verb. It's a natural way language works, and he didn't understand that. It would have been
I
helpful.
barely use the language I was born with.
You're doing okay as far as I can tell. I think you're doing fine. But anyway, that's
Really
why
intimidated by Greek and Hebrew.
well, that's why you go to school to learn. And so just keep working at it. But you know what, though? You can actually take at least, I have a young nephew that is he learned Latin in school. He went to private school, got his Latin down. He wanted to learn Greek. So I've given him a Greek New Testament, a Greek dictionary, and I've been teaching him some. And he's picking it up, understanding how it works. It just takes a while to do it. And true, there's always going to be people at language who are better than others. I know that. But the fact is, you gain so much value when you can read more intelligently what you're reading. And so I encourage you to do it. I started learning Greek when I was in high school by myself.
Too late for me.
Well, see, no, you got time.
No, to do it in high school.
to do high schools for sure. Of course, I loved all that kind of stuff. I won't go into my training. But the fact is, it makes a difference. It's like that word, the thing I taught you in John 15. You probably never heard that. But it simply does not, by any, there's no examples. It never means to cut off. Never. And yet almost every translation does it. And almost every translation says rebellion or something like that. People translating don't always really pay attention by using the grammars and lexicons as they translate. They basically restate it like some other translation had it and keep moving because they only have 10 minutes per verse to work.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to encourage people is to be more diligent. And by the way, I had one translator, I will not go into names, but had a translation in Galatians that was terrible. And I said, this does not mean what the Greek says. And after 3 years of bothering him with it, he was a friend and also head of a translation committee. After 3 years of bothering, he finally came to me in an academic meeting I was at, and he walked up and he said, Wayne, we changed it. I said, it's about time after 3 years of telling you to do it, because it simply did not mean what you said. And it was important. It was an important usage of the term. So we always have to reach for that. But that's what
I do enjoy lessons like that.
Yeah. Well, see, that's my purpose. I've been doing this a long time. I started teaching elementary and intermediate Greek at a seminary when I was 24.
Wow.
So I've been reading this stuff my whole life. And so I don't mean to say that to brag. It took a lot of work. But the point of it is, you have to have people who will stand in the gap, so to speak, and keep people from making dumb errors in translation.
Yeah.
And I'm serious. Okay.
Are all translators? I don't think I am.
Okay. Well, let me keep moving here a little bit, and we'll let you guys go sometime tonight. So I'm suggesting here, and you reading this afterwards, okay? And that way you'll gain some skill in understanding the use of terminology and how it works. But if you're defining what a theology is and what does the Bible mean, it's important to be serious about it and to be very careful about working on it. So I work here and giving you a whole argument on stuff, and you can read that later. These are on video, so you can check them out. This is an example of the anaphoric use of the article. That guy I was talking to had no clue what I was talking about, but he thought he knew a lot, but he didn't know very much at all. And he was selling his book to these people, and he may not get many people buying this next year. Let's see. That's all grammatical stuff I talk about. You again can read this stuff. It's grammatical and explain how the Greek works in these areas. I also quote Greek scholars that are well known, especially historically. So I go through the whole process here, and that's what I would suggest you do. We've only got 15 minutes left, so I want to be sure we are able to get through some more stuff. I knew that was a lot harder to do, and so I took the time to do it because it's important enough that we get that straight. Let's see. Conclusion. Okay. Now, let me say one thing about this thing here. I'll put it over here. This is that article, or I don't mean article. It's a chapter I wrote in a book for this guy, and he asked me if I would take the first half of the tribulation. This is chapter 6 and 7, and what is going on there in reference to what's going on in the Antichrist in the world at that time. And see, a lot of people get something mixed up. And let me show you something where it is. Daniel has a lot of discussion here, and if you want to, you can read this. I guess I can move this slower if you want to just look at this, but you'll be able to get these things on my own website. But where is that exactly? Daniel 70 weeks. If you haven't studied that, you should read Daniel 7 through 9, be good. Then I talk about the Olivet Discourse and the Seal of Judgments in Revelation 6. Remember, we've already said tonight that the Olivet Discourse deals largely with what we think of as a tribulation period, the person who wants to declare himself, Messiah and God and all those things. That's what that's talking about, not the rapture per se. That's already occurred, and these things and most of what Jesus talks about goes through the tribulation period all the way to the second coming. So we need not to get that mixed up. Now, where is that one half I want to look at? Here we have this, and I've already said, the scriptural foundations for this being the first half in the tribulation period. The biblical framework for the tribulation rests on several other texts, and I give them up to you here. As mentioned before, Daniel 9 predicts that a future prince will confirm a covenant with Israel for 1 week of 7 years, and then he will break it. Who is that?
The Antichrist.
The Antichrist. Now, doesn't that make sense? Read Daniel, read the Olivet Discourse, read the passages in the book of Revelation, chapter 6 and 7. Pay attention to what we're talking about in 2 Thessalonians 2. And all these passages sort of put the same things together. In other words, I'm not making this up. The biblical text, it develops these different concepts and themes. So you have a future prince who will confirm a covenant, and that is in fact for 7 years, and then he'll break it and desecrate. Matthew 24, 4 through 14 records Jesus' description of the beginning of birth pains. Why would he wouldn't use the term birth pains for something really good about to take place, would he? Probably not. Deception, wars, famines, earthquakes, persecution, that sounds like something going on in the tribulation period. These parallels the early sealed judgments of Revelation 6, suggesting that the first half of the tribulation corresponds. Now, what you're going to find interesting, when you read the book of Revelation, the tribulation is talked about as a punishment from the Antichrist. In other words, the Antichrist is the big deal during the first portion. The second portion, though, of the tribulation period and the revelation is actually God's judgment on the earth, not the Antichrist and his sin. The Antichrist is involved in all sorts of evil activity, killing people, claiming to be God, doing all these things he does. That's the beginning. That's after the rapture. But the remainder of tribulation period is God bringing judgment upon the earth. What's interesting, though, is that God actually protects the 144,000 that he sends out to the world and keeps them from being put or killed. And what are they doing? They're preaching the gospel to the people who eventually embrace Christ before the second coming. So, you can read on to this. Notice if you see here, you check this out in Matthew 24, 6 through 9, then puts it together. Now, I have here a chronology of the first half. If you want to read this, go into the various people. You have 4 horsemen. The first horseman has been argued by some to be Christ, Jesus. But when you start reading about the 4 horsemen, it's obvious it's not. Jesus is none of the horsemen. He's not there on a horse. The first one is actually the Antichrist himself, who makes himself out like the Messiah. He's not Messiah, but he makes himself to be like Messiah. And then after him come 3 more judgments that come upon the world from him. He brings devastation, murder, starving people to death, all sorts of things before he finally is put under by Jesus himself when he comes. Okay? Any questions at that point? So I talk about these different ones. You can go read them. Discussing all of that, what he does, persecution. And then we get into things that recur afterwards. Okay, so you can go read through each of these and you'll find it out. Chapter 6 and 7, basically, the book of Revelation. Okay, now what I want to do when we come together next time, we got just a short time left. What I want to do is come together and talk about the end of the tribulation, the second portion. And then after that, we'll go into a discussion of the second coming of Christ and the millennium. So we'll do the 1,000 years and discuss that. And then we'll finish off with the new heavens and the new earth. By the way, there's a guy right now who's arguing, he's writing books. Well-known scholar, won't go too much, but he's totally embraced evolution. And he argues that the creation cannot be a narrative that's historical, but must be a mythical account. And one of the reasons why he argues that is he said, look here, you have light before there's even the sun and the moon created. Then I was reading in Revelation 17, and it said, and you read that passage, Revelation 17 says, there is no more need in the new heavens and earth. There's no more need for sun or light. There's no more need for sun or moon, for God is the light. And I thought that's interesting because in Genesis, God is the light, and then the sun and moon is created. In Revelation 17, the new heavens and new earth, there's no more need for sun and moon because God is the light. Just the opposite statement. And so you have guys who are not real careful reading the text. Either that or they're just so prejudiced they don't know what else to do. I encourage you not to do that. There's a place for us to differ and to be obviously very, very kind to people and understanding. And we need to have good attitudes and be ironic in our approach. On the other hand, there's a place for truth. And we have to be sticklers at trying to maintain truth in our analysis. Any other comment? Everybody's looking good. Okay. Well, God bless each of you. And by the way, I should tell you something that Dr. Gromacki asked me to share today. Ready? Here's my notes to give you before you leave. In reference to assignment 3, it's due today if you haven't done it. So please get assignment 3 in. Okay? Everybody with me? That's to be done. That's part of the course. He says March 6th, which is still coming up here, is the last day of the course. So we only have one more 3-hour course. Ready? Now, he said that there's no assignment for everybody on assignment 4. He says, I'm going to exempt people from assignment 4. And he says, I'm already giving everybody 200 points in doing so. So when you get your grading, you realize that Dr. Gromacki has given you 200 points up front in doing it, and you don't have to do that assignment, but you do have to do the remainder. Any questions on that? He wanted me to give that to you. Well, I hope you do well. I'm got about another week before I'm really feeling on top of things after all the surgery and all the stuff I've had. So, but then we'll be back at least one more time, and I really appreciate each of you. And if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. God's blessings.